G'day guys, Ryan here, your Chief Espresso Officer, and today we're going to be looking at what espresso grinder to buy in 2022. It's really interesting and I love doing a video about grinding. I've done so many experiments over the years. The single most important accessory is your grinder. I've been in the industry since back when we didn't have any accessories or any technology to tell us how good coffee could be. So I've experimented with WDT tools, distribution tools, tampers, extra filters, precision screens, all different things that you can do to help get your coffee better. But the grinder keeps coming up as the most important thing, because without a good grinder, you can't do anything. It's like putting a band-aid on a gaping wound. Unless you get it stitched up first and you get it closed up, that band-aid really is not going to do much at all. So you should watch this video first before you've bought your machine, before you've even bought any grinders, because this will help you understand exactly how much you should budget for your grinder. In an ideal world, you could buy the cheapest machine, like the Audi machine that I keep banging on about, and buy yourself a nice $5,000 EK43. That would be ideal. Most people don't want a massive grinder on their benchtop and a crappy espresso machine. Most people want to have their sexy new espresso machine, and the grinder is sort of an afterthought. But really, if you were serious about getting into coffee, you should spend more on your grinder, set yourself up that you never have to replace your grinder, and then start out with a cheapy espresso machine. Then you can upgrade that over the years. Because a grinder, looked after, well maintained and cleaned, probably will last you forever. Yeah, so what do you look for in a grinder? Well, that's what I'll help you with today, because there's thousands of grinders as well. I can't cover all of them in a small video like this. Also, there's preferences. It depends on what you're looking for. So obviously budget. That's going to be one that is going to be important to you. Now, as I said before, if you can adjust the way that you look at a grinder and go, well, I'm investing more budget into the grinder, and push your budget up, fantastic. But if you need to start out with the really low end ones, I would just recommend getting a conical or a flat burr grinder. Don't go with any blade grinders. So anything that says blades, stay away from that. You want to look for burrs. Flat or conical, they're very much the same. There's different schools of thought on which one is better. General rule of thumb is that a conical grinder is a little bit less consistent in terms of that consistency of grind. Flat burr grinder can get larger and give you a lot more speed, but more consistent as well. Obviously, the price goes up the larger the grinder goes, because it depends on what setting you're using it in, whether you're a cafe or just like doing it at home. You need to make lots of coffee for an office, or whether you're just making one coffee for yourself. We'll look at all of those different variables for you. Price, the speed, if you're not fussed about it, then it doesn't really matter. If you're doing it for an office and you just need to dose up a lot of coffees in one setting, then speed is going to be a factor for you. Most people don't realize that the most important part about the grind is the consistency of the grind size itself. If you have a grinder that grinds really nicely, but some chunks are huge, some chunks are tiny, some are just fine dust, then your coffee is not going to extract evenly, and you're going to get a range of different flavors from burnt, bitter, sour, all in there, and it's just going to create this muddiness. So consistency is actually the most important part when talking about grinding, because who cares if it takes a long time to get it, as long as it's consistent, unless you're in a cafe and everyone's waiting on their coffee within 1 minute. Now, the other important things that you need to consider is, are you just getting into coffee for the first time? Because if you are, then maybe you just settle for one of the cheaper ones, which will just get you started. Much better than buying pre-ground from a cafe, and doesn't cost you that much, and it gets you involved and understanding a bit about coffee and how to make it. And if you're drinking a lot of milk-based coffees, then again, the grinder isn't as important as if you're chasing that lovely, delicious, single origin black coffee that really needs to shine, and so you need the grinder to do its best job so that it brings out all of those beautiful characteristics that are trapped inside the beans. Also, single dosing is a new sort of style. So when you're dosing your coffee, you don't want to have any of that trapped inside the grinder. If you're making 100 coffees a day, the grind retention isn't as important because it's just pushing through coffee after coffee. But if you're doing one coffee and you want to get it perfect, then grind retention is something that you need to be aware of, because if you put in 22 grams but you only get out 20 grams, it's going to change the way that you make the coffee, going to change the way that the coffee tastes, and it probably change the way they make the next coffee, because that 2 grams is still up inside the machine and will come through in your next lot, which will mean it will overdose your next one and underdose some. So that's something to keep an eye on. Okay, now a quick note on cheap grinders. Yes, I always say a grinder is better than pre-ground, because what happens with pre-ground is the moment the beans are ground, all of those oils evaporate or start to evaporate and go up into the air. So the longer you leave ground coffee out or exposed to light, oxygen, moisture, the more it deteriorates and becomes inert, loses all of its oils, loses all its flavor. A cheap grinder like this one here that we just picked up from the supermarket for $39 seems like a good idea. Okay, I need to get a grinder. Ryan's telling me I gotta get a grinder. I'll buy this one. It's 39 bucks, saves me money, keeps him happy, everyone's happy. It's probably not the best idea. I just don't think at this level, the grinder is gonna do anything to really help you other than keep your grinds fresh. If you have a local cafe or a local roastery that you can go to and get them to pre-grind it, and you can pick it up in small quantities that maybe last you no more than a week, I would probably choose that over buying this grinder. It just isn't worth it. The minimum grinder entry level that I would recommend is the Breville Smart Grinder Pro. The Breville Smart Grinder Pro, or the dose control, which is very similar and virtually no different other than the LED screen, is where I would say that should be your basic starting level. Don't go any lower than that. They're about $200 and you can find them anywhere. They come built in some of the machines. So this is the same grinder that's in the Breville Barista Pro, but separate, and a little bit more control over it rather than having it just in your machine. That is your minimum. Go out and buy that machine if you cannot afford anything more. It's a stepped grinder, so it means it's not stepless, meaning it doesn't have infinite amount of control over the grind size. However, it's enough to get you started, and it has enough increments to find and hone in on, hopefully, your espresso that you're trying to achieve at home. It is slow, it is a little bit noisy, and it does clump together a little bit, and I have noticed that it does have quite a wide variation in the grind size. So even if you're grinding it at 6 or 5 for espresso, you still find there's some little tiny fines ending up in there, and that can cause a bit of an issue channeling your coffee, which is where water passes through your coffee more quickly and doesn't pick up all of those beautiful oils. The other problem with these Breville machines is that they don't last long. So they are an appliance. They don't really go for more than maybe 3 to 5 years. If you invest in a more expensive grinder, it could be one that you hold on to for life. And it doesn't have to be that much more expensive, but the quality of some of those more expensive grinders, and because they are built to do just one thing, you will have this one for life or until you decide to upgrade yourself. So the other one in this range is Baratza Encore. Now, again, it's an entry-level grinder, and it's great if you're just starting out. My downside for this one, Baratza's a great brand, but this particular one doesn't have a portafilter holder, so you can't dose straight into your portafilter like you can with the Breville Smart Grinder. You have to get it into this canister and then transfer it. So a little bit of the downside there. Even bother with the Sunbeam grinder. They have so many issues. Often people buy them and then can't even get the fine grind straight away. It doesn't go fine enough for espresso. So they have to get a little mod, get some rings, pop them in there. It's a bit of a muck around just to get that extra fine grind, and it's not gonna last anyway. Just steer clear of Sunbeam. So jumping up from that $200 price range, we can look at Baratza Sette 270. They're about $450. Now, I used to really recommend this to a lot of home baristas starting out because it's a beautiful design. It has a lot of different settings, so it has 270 different steps. So even though it's not stepless, a lot more than the Breville gives you. It's about 5 times more than the Breville. You can see my blog that I wrote in 2019 ranking this as the #1 grinder to buy for your home setup. However, I've now seen so many people have issues with them where they just have to get them replaced, repair the motor. It's expensive, and from a grinder that costs you $450, you want to get a lot more out of it than just a couple of years. So I've gone cold on the Sette 270, and I think the 270 weighted volume is even more expensive, and it's the same build. I don't have my high hopes for that grinder either. So for now, I'm not going to recommend the Baratza Sette 270 until I find out that they've improved their build, their quality of their build, and people are getting a better experience out of it at home. The Iberital is a brand that is not really well known. It's a Spanish brand, and normally I'm not super hot on Spanish brands making the coffee stuff because Italy's right next door. They seem to do it a lot better. However, the Iberital is not a bad brand, and this particular grinder called the Challenger is fine. It's a great entry-level one. It's nothing flash, it doesn't look overly sexy, but it's a workhorse. I've had one of these grinders over 10 years. I gave it to my brother. He's still using it to this day. It's never been serviced. I don't know how he looks after it, even if he takes care of it, but it's still going and it's still producing a decent grind every day, 10 years on. And for something this cheap, that's a really good sign that the quality of this machine is very high. It is a conical grinder. It's a 38mm conical grinder, which is perfect for getting the job done. It's slow, but it does deliver a decent grind size. The next one I am going to recommend is the Rancilio Rocky. It isn't a sexy grinder either. However, just like my love for Rancilio dating right back to the late 90s, I think that the Rancilio Rocky is one of the best workhorse grinders, about $400 range. It's so good, it just keeps going and going and going forever. Now, it's perfect for those of you who have bought the Rancilio Silvia. Sits neatly next to it and they pair up really nicely. So if you've already purchased the Rancilio Silvia, then I highly recommend you go out to buy the Rancilio Rocky to complement it. But there is a thing to note about the Rancilio Rocky and some of these other grinders, is that if you overfill them and then try to adjust the grinds, often they get clogged up with beans inside. So it's much easier if you just do a small dose and then you adjust the grinds. If you're not making different coffees every day and trying different origins, then maybe you can stick to just filling the hopper and you won't need to do too many adjustments each day. If you are trying different coffees out, just put in a small amount. Make sure you get the adjustments right, because you'll thank me later when you're not trying to squeeze the thing and using all your energy just to try and crush a few beans as you go. So something to note as well is about stepless and stepped grinders. Most grinders are fine to be stepped if they have a big enough range. What does it mean to have a stepless or stepped grinder? Well, it's literally exactly as it sounds. Stepless means it spins and it's not restricting you to what grind size it is, so it means there's an infinite number of possibilities where you really can hone in on that perfect grind, because everything affects grind. It could be the temperature, it could be the humidity, it could be the light. So every day you might have to adjust the grind slightly. And if you're between two steps and you want to actually go halfway between that on a step grinder, that's impossible, but it might be exactly where you think it's perfectly set, then a stepless grinder is going to give you way more flexibility of just honing it into that ever so small amount. We're talking microns here, and maybe not even hundreds of microns. We're talking like between 20 to 30 microns sometimes. Next up, we've got the Eureka Mignon. Now there's a couple of different versions of it. There's the single dose version, which is a little bit more expensive. There's the Silencio, there's the one that they made before the Silencio, which was loud, which is why this one's called Silencio. And then there's the Specialita. They're all very similar, and the Eureka Mignon is a fantastic machine. It's got an anti-clumper, an anti-static. So what that means is when your coffee comes through, because obviously it's friction and friction causes heat, coffee tends to become hot and static. So the electricity can build up in it, causing it to clump together, and that's not great for your extraction. So a lot of brands now have started including anti-static and anti-clumping. And those help just create a really nice powdery soft grind that's even across all of them, and the Eureka Mignon does exactly this. The other thing that I like about it is that it has a stepless grinder adjuster dial. And you don't have to turn all of the beans in the hopper. You can just adjust the dial here and it gives you that same accuracy. The only thing to note is when you do adjust the grind, because it's adjusting the burrs, purge a little bit of the coffee first and then adjust it a little bit more, purge a bit more if you need to adjust it multiple times. But the good thing about the Eureka Mignon is that it has a really low retention rate. And this, we talked about earlier, is when the coffee doesn't all come through. Because of the design of the chamber, there's a very short distance between the hopper and where the coffee comes out, meaning most of the coffee comes straight through into your portafilter. It's a very low retention, which just means you get much better consistency from cup to cup. So that's it for under $500, and I think that's a good place to start if you're starting out in espresso and you have a tight budget. I would definitely put aside $500 to invest in a grinder. Now, if you can stretch to $1,000, you've got a lot more options, and the machine quality gets so much better, which ultimately means better coffee, better tasting coffee. First up, from above the 500 range, is the Quamar Q50. There's the electronic and the manual, but they have a 54mm flat burr, which means they're pretty fast. They're not super fast, very consistent, and these machines are one of those machines that I really believe can just last you forever. I haven't had any problems with them other than a few minor clumping issues, which you can just get in there and clean out. In terms of what you're looking at for a Mazza, and there's a note on a Mazza, I'm not that high on Mazza grinders anymore. They are great machines. I think in Australia, they really suffer because we have higher humidity here, and the anti-static, anti-clumper things don't really work. They build up a huge amount of coffee in the chamber because of the designs, and that means that you get a higher retention of those grinds over time. I found they are definitely not a machine that I would put in a commercial setting anymore, just because when I try to dial it in throughout a day's work, and as the blades really heat up, they change the grind so dramatically that I wasted so much coffee continuously refining and refining that grind to get it perfect for every cup. So I've gone really cold on them now, and I won't recommend any of them in this video. Now, at around the $1,000 mark, my favorite brand of coffee grinders is the Mahlkonig. And the X54, you can get it now for about under $1,000, and they are fantastic machines. Mahlkonig is known, German engineering, for precision work. And this one behind me, the EK43, is actually a spice grinder that fell into the specialty coffee world because it was so good for grinding coffee because of the blade design. So Mahlkonig are known for their precision work. And so the X54 has nice speed 54mm blades. It runs a little bit slower, so it's about 1,000 RPM, which means the rotations are a lot lower, so a little bit quieter. The Quamar's 1,400, a little bit louder. But also with the speed, it doesn't affect the consistency. So a lot of times you'll get these bigger blade machines that can really heat up throughout the day and your consistency goes out the window. With the Mahlkonigs, they really focus on their precision work. They have the best technology to deliver consistent grind size in a speedy time without sacrificing any quality. And around this price, you have another brand that I recommend highly, Lelit. Now, we talked about Lelit machines. They're a fantastic Italian brand that produce nothing overly sexy. They're not the sexiest machines, but they are workhorses. And the Lelit William, the PL72 grinder, is perfect for complementing any Lelit machine that you may have. Now, Lelit also make machines that have a grinder built in, like the one Kate, and they all have female names and male names for the grinders. I love it. The William perfectly complements any of the range that doesn't have a grinder built into it, obviously. It's a huge 64mm blade, which really means that it grinds really nicely, really fast. My only point of contention for this particular grinder is that it still is a stepped grinder, when so many at this price point are stepless. And for those aficionados that really want to delve deeply into the coffee grinds, then I really think that maybe you should look at a stepless grinder. However, this is a solid machine, solid grinder, and I rate it really highly. Now there's literally heaps of brands that produce grinders around the 1 to 2K. There's Isomac, there's Profitec, there's Macap, there's Compact, there's so many different brands, I can't rate them all. I just really like to go to the $2,000 one, which is the Niche Zero. The Niche Zero looks amazing. It just looks like it's been designed by Apple, and they've created a product for the expert coffee world where people can really hone in on their coffee. This particular one is called the Zero because it has a feature that everyone is asking for: zero retention. Remember, we talked about retention before, and that it can affect your next cup of coffee as well as the cup of coffee that you're making now. With zero retention means that you put in 22.1 gram coffee, you're gonna get out 22.1 gram coffee. Maybe a few molecules of coffee might not make it in there, but the majority of it does. It's a single dose grinder, meaning you have to weigh it out every time you want to grind. You can't fill up a hopper like some of the other machines and have it sitting there for days on end. This one is, you want to make a coffee now, 22.1 grams, chuck it in, grind, ends up in your portafilter, make your coffee. This is perfect for the person who's really wanting to hone in on their espresso. They want to hone in on dialing in different coffees every day. A lot of people I talk to want to explore coffee like I do, so they don't just have one coffee that they set and forget. This is for the person who wants to have a Guatemalan one day, wants to have an Ethiopian the next, wants to make a nice little filter coffee from Costa Rica the day after that. Then they want to go back and make something Turkish, so then they have a Turkish coffee. These grinders are designed for those people who want to play around with grind, who want to try out different settings, who want to fiddle around with it, who want to spend an hour making great coffee. That's not for everyone. But if you're that sort of person and you have the budget, then I would say go out and get yourself a Niche Zero. They are definitely worth the money. Another one that's similar to the Niche, which is becoming a lot more on TikTok now, is the Weber Key. It's about $2,500. It also is a lovely looking machine. There's another one by Weber. It's called the EG1. It's that one that looks like a rocket ship. It looks amazing. It's about $4,500, so don't get your hopes up if you're hoping to get it under a K. But it truly is. It's one of their flat burr designs, and then they have the Key, which is their conical burr design. And so both of these are variable RPM, which means you can change the rate, the speed of which those burrs spin. This is getting hot right now in coffee because people are starting to understand that, hey, maybe this does affect the way that our coffee tastes. And if we use a higher speed than a lower speed, we get a different result, as long as we don't affect the consistency. Because obviously grinding faster is a good thing. However, if it becomes an inconsistent grind, then it's not really doing its job. So these Weber machines allow you to play around with the grind speed. They are all great, fantastic machines, and if you've got the budget, I would definitely recommend one of these. Next, we go on to my favorite, the EK43, massive machine. Obviously you don't want to have something like that on your bench, but they've now made exactly the same model with the build, with the engine, with the motor, with the blades, the same design, but a smaller version called the EK43S, which is about half the size, and that does probably look a little better with your machine at home. Why I love the EK43 is because the blades are vertical. So that means that there's zero retention, really zero retention, because the coffee just falls straight through. The pathway between the coffee beans and where it comes out is straight, and so it just falls down and you get perfectly consistent grinds all the time. The other thing I love about it is that it can go from doing an espresso grind to a plunger to a cold brew in a second, and it takes nothing at all. You don't have to worry about trying to push beans around and grind like that. Literally, with a turn of a dial, you can go from espresso to cold brew in 1 second. So there you go, there's a quick overview of some of the grinders out there. There's one for everyone, and I can't stress how important they are. Before you buy your precision tamper, baskets, screens, distribution tools, scales, all of that, invest first in a grinder. And if you can get it that you can invest a little bit more, maybe more than you would have liked to, but really setting yourself up for the future, because I think home coffee is really going to become the future of coffee for most people in the world, because coffee is going so much more expensive now, and it might become to the point where it's actually not affordable to buy a coffee out every day. It makes it much more important to be able to get best coffee at home. It makes it much more important to be able to get best coffee at home. So if you're interested in looking at how to become an expert home barista, the Ultimate Home Barista course is available on my website, coffeebeansdelivered.com.au. There's a ton of information in there, and including a course that'll help you choose which coffee machine to buy, which grinder to buy, and then how to get the best out of it at your home. Jump on the website now and you can purchase it there. Give me a like, give me a subscribe, leave a comment in the section below. I answer most comments I can, so if you've got a question about a grinder that I haven't named here, please pop it in the section below and I'll get back to you. That's it for a high-level overview. Next up, we're going to go into an in-depth report on what coffee machine to buy so that you can get all the information you need to make the right decision. I'm Ryan, your Chief Espresso Officer. Enjoy your brew.